Well, first of all, I need to apologise to anyone from the religion of peace who has sent me a death threat recently. I'm afraid I haven't been able to respond, unfortunately, because I get so many messages and emails from sane people that it takes up all my time in replying to as many of them as I can. So if you haven't heard from me, please don't think I'm being rude, because I would hate to cause offence. I suppose I should have realised that some people would fly off the handle at being told that they can't take criticism. I can take criticism, which is just as well, because I get called a racist and an Islamophobe almost every single day, not to mention a Jew, a homosexual, and various other names that some Muslims seem to think are insults, when in fact they're not. And I don't mind. You won't find me running to a tribunal or a human rights commission to whine and whinge about it for financial gain, unlike some delicate souls we could mention. But one thing that does bother me is the fact that some people seem to think that I've got something against all Muslims, which simply isn't true. Anyone who's seen my videos knows very well that I've got no problem with anyone, no matter what they believe, who doesn't want to interfere with my freedom. And that includes freedom from religion, of course. That's all religion, all the time. And I know that there are plenty of Muslims who agree with me about that, because some of them actually write to me and tell me so, and I'm very grateful for their support. But just because those people are enlightened, that doesn't mean that Islam itself is benign or should be trusted, because unfortunately right now the cutting edge of Islam is in other hands, and those hands are a lot less enlightened and a lot more dangerous. The royal family of Saudi Arabia, a small coterie of people unelected by anybody, have hijacked that country's vast oil wealth and are using it to force the very worst of Islam into the free world. So far they've spent $100 billion building mosques and funding pressure groups of fanatics who install themselves in Western society under grand official-sounding titles full of words like Congress and Council, and then claim to speak for all Muslims, while in reality doing all they can to stop Muslims from integrating, because their existence and their income depend on keeping Muslims separate and in conflict with everybody else. So when it's claimed, as it was last week on British television, that Muslims in Britain are victims of British intolerance, yeah, right, 1,600 mosques worth of intolerance so far and still building, I think the truth is, if they are victims of anything, it's Muslim intolerance. Because if you are an ordinary Muslim, surely the last thing you need is a bunch of Islamists speaking for you. Because everything they do and say reflects back on you. When they try to force unwanted Islamic values into our education system, for example, or when one of their representatives crudely insults this country by comparing it with Nazi Germany, that reflects on all Muslims, because these people speak for all Muslims. Don't they? No? Well, maybe somebody should tell them that. To be fair, one thing that really doesn't help is when some patronising multicultural fascist decides to ban something innocuous because they think Muslims would be offended by it. These are the same people, no doubt, who decided that kitchen staff in hospitals and schools have to serve the cruelty of halal meat to everyone because it's uneconomical to do it separately, and Muslims must never be offended. Or the people who offered Muslim-only days in public swimming pools, excluding everybody else, because it seems that some Muslims actually are offended at having to bathe among kafirs and infidels. Now, technically, that's not racist of them, because Islam is not a race, so that's okay then. But anyone who criticises it is a racist, because language means whatever we want it to mean in the topsy-turvy world of multicultural hypocrisy, where everyone in the West is automatically guilty of crimes committed by their ancestors, should be deeply ashamed of their identity, and spend their whole lives apologising for it. There was one particularly silly incident in Dundee recently. You probably saw this story. It was all over the news, where a Muslim councillor took it upon himself to decide that a police poster with a puppy dog on it was offensive to Muslims. Well, in the event, it was wishful thinking on his part, because nobody actually gave a damn, but the police went ahead and apologised anyway, like a bunch of dimmies. Recently, the West Midlands Police had to fork out substantial damages to the makers of a television film, Undercover Mosque, who they'd falsely accused of misrepresenting the intolerant Muslim bigots they exposed. Now, you can't blame the individual police officers for this kind of behaviour because they're in an impossible situation, under orders from above that political correctness trumps common sense. So they're forced to treat the word Islamophobia as if it's a real word, and as if there's actually something wrong with people who dislike Islam for the sexism, racism and homophobia that run through it like a watermark. But let's not be too negative here. Occasionally, just occasionally, a small oasis of sanity does emerge from this desert of bollock-brained Islamic appeasement. You may remember those stupid Muslim law students who allowed themselves to be used as sock puppets by the Canadian Islamic Congress in order to exploit that country's insane human rights legislation and stamp out free speech. Well, the case has been thrown out by the Canadian Human Rights Commission, which is good news, but the British Columbia Commission might yet embarrass itself by ruling in their favour. But either way, in bringing this case in the first place, and with the public reaction it's received, these idiots have clearly managed to expose themselves to the hatred and contempt that they had falsely accused Maclean's magazine of fostering. And who can say that they haven't earned it with full honours? They surely deserve all the scorn and derision and suspicion that's now bound to follow them around like a vapour trail, because everyone knows their underhand motive in bringing this case had nothing to do with human rights and everything to do with stamping out legitimate criticism of Islam. They tried to hijack the law to piss on our freedom, and the wind blew it back in their faces. You could almost call it a legal suicide bomb, if you wanted to be offensive. Peace. Now that is a much better idea. Don't you think?